Minor 7th flat 5 chords are weird. They look like a math problem, they always want to be resolved, they're diminished but only half. You can't just randomly slap a ninth on them or use them in a modal context like you can the big 3. It took me a long time to make sense of minor 7th flat 5 chords, but once I got it, I realized that they're actually pretty easy to deal with. So in this video, I'd like to share a very simple algorithm that will cover all your minor 7th flat 5 needs. Alright, first I'll show you my 3-step approach to dealing with minor 7th flat 5 chords, or half-diminished chords as many people call them, and then I'll show you some examples of how to apply it. Now, disclaimer, I'm not saying this is the only way to think about this. This is just the way that works best for me and that I recommend to my students. So here's the algorithm, and I'm gonna use D minor 7th flat 5 as an example. Step 1, find the third of the chord, in this case that's F. Step 2, for voicings, play either a minor triad or a minor 6th voicing or a minor major 7th voicing of that note. So here it would be any F minor voicing or any F minor 6 voicing or any F minor major 7 voicing. Step 3, for soloing, play either a Dorian scale or a melodic minor scale of that same note. So here that would be F Dorian or F melodic minor. That's it. That's the shortcut. If you do that anytime you see a minor 7th flat 5 chord, you'll sound like a pro. Now, before I play some examples, here's just a little bit of context. Most of the time, a minor 7th flat 5 chord functions as a 2 chord in a minor key. And a 2 minor 7th flat 5 chord is essentially a 4 minor 6 chord in disguise. Now, I could give you a long, boring music theory explanation, but just trust me on this. Also, smarter people than me have framed it that way. For example, Thelonious Monk, just to drop one famous name that garners respect. According to that framing, a D minor 7th flat 5 chord is an F minor 6 chord in disguise, and we can just treat it as such, as I did with the 3-step process I just showed you. Just go to the third of whichever half-diminished chord you're looking at and go from there. Now let me show you how this plays out in practical application. For voicings, and continuing with D minor 7th flat 5 as our example, there are 3 variations of an F minor chord that we can use here. A straight up F minor triad, or an F minor 6 chord, or an F minor major 7 chord. The simplest way to voice the D minor 7th flat 5 chord is to just play an F minor triad. Now, usually I will play the root D in the bass register along with that, unless there's a bass player who I know will play the D. You can play the F minor chord in any inversion with or without doublings. My favorite of these is a second inversion F minor with D in the bass. These will also work well in a pop music context, where you don't necessarily want to be too hip. Next up, we have an F minor 6 chord, which is a D minor 7th flat 5 chord in first inversion, so that makes sense. And obviously we can use all 4 inversions of that F minor 6 shape. But here's where it gets interesting. If I voice an F minor 6 chord in a jazz context, I'm usually not just gonna play the basic chord shape. Instead, a lot of these voicings will have one or both of the following characteristics. 1. They will include extensions, in this case 9 and or 11. And 2. They will not contain the root. So here are some of my favorite F minor 6 voicings. For one hand, and for 2 hands. So what does all that mean if we play these F minor 6 voicings over a D minor 7 flat 5 chord? Well, as far as extensions, the 9th of the F minor 6 chord is the same note as the 11th of the D minor 7 flat 5 chord. And the 11th of the F minor 6 is the flat 13th of the D minor 7 flat 5. So adding extensions to the F minor 6 voicing also adds extensions to the D minor 7 flat 5 chord. And as I mentioned, it's very common for jazz voicings to not contain the root of the chord. And you just heard me play a bunch of F minor 6 voicings that did not contain an F. But if we play the same voicings for D minor 7 flat 5, then the F is the third, and we're usually told that voicings should definitely contain the third. Well, that is true, except for minor 7 flat 5 chords, which is partly why they were so confusing to me for the longest time. I heard people play minor 7 flat 5 voicings left and right that did not contain the third. It turns out, while the guide tones that voicings are built on for most of the basic 7th or 6th chord qualities are 3 and 7 or 6, for minor 7 flat 5 chords they are often 1 and flat 5. And 1 and flat 5 of D minor 7 flat 5 are D and A flat, which are also flat 3 and 6 of F minor. So if we think F minor instead of D minor 7 flat 5, we are actually playing the third of the chord in our voicings. It's all connected. Okay, the third and hippest option is to play an F minor major 7 chord as a voicing for D minor 7 flat 5. And in order to make sense of this, we have to briefly talk about ninths. The ninth is probably the most common extension that's added to jazz voicings. And for most 7th and 6th chord qualities, the only available ninth extension is a major ninth. The exception to this are dominant chords, to which we can add a major ninth, a minor ninth, or an augmented ninth. Now, adding a diatonic ninth to a minor 7 flat 5 chord would usually mean adding a minor ninth. But that doesn't really work, and it's almost never done. But adding a major ninth gives us a really beautiful sound. But there's a caveat here. Remember, the majority of the time when we encounter a D minor 7 flat 5 chord, it will be in the key of C minor, and the ninth, E, takes us out of the key of C minor in a pretty significant way, the third being the most important signifier of major or minor tonality. This is not a problem if you're playing serious jazz, but it can also be too hip for the room sometimes if you're going for a more traditional vibe. All that to say, playing an F minor major 7 voicing for a D minor 7 flat 5 chord is a great option, but it should be used with some discretion. Here are my favorite one-handed voicings for this scenario. For two-handers, use either these four or you can use this simple algorithm. Play flat 3 and 6 as your guide tones, in this case D and A flat. And then add a major triad built on the 5th, in this case C major. Okay, now let's talk about soloing over minor 7 flat 5 chords. Before we go to scales, I want to mention that we could use the chord shapes we just talked about in the voicings chapter in a melodic fashion as well. So we can improvise with an F minor shape or an F minor 6 shape or an F minor major 7 shape. That's cool, but it only takes us so far. So let's move on to scales. As I mentioned in chapter 1, there are basically two scales that are commonly used on half-diminished chords. Most people think of them as scales built on the root of the minor 7 flat 5 chord, and they are Locrian and Locrian sharp 2. And that's perfectly fine. But again, personally, I prefer thinking of them as scales from the third of the chord, in which case they are Dorian and melodic minor. So, in the case of D minor 7 flat 5, we go to the third again, which is F, and then play either F Dorian which is the same as D Locrian, or F melodic minor, which is the same as D Locrian sharp 2. Let me demonstrate using F Dorian to solo over a D minor 7 flat 5 chord. Notice that the note E flat is best used with some discretion here. Here is another example. To better reflect what we might do in an actual solo and not an exercise, this time I'll use some chromatic passing tones that are not part of the scale as well. So that scale was the safer choice. It will pretty much always work. The second option is F melodic minor, which is the parent scale that D Locrian sharp 2 is derived from. Here's me demonstrating the use of F melodic minor to play over D minor 7 flat 5. And here is a melodic minor example that includes some chromatic passing tones. I did a whole video on the melodic minor scale and its application in improvisation, in case you want to check that out. And that's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love.